When my parents were looking for their first house, they found one for a really good deal. A little too good. The neighbors and the realtor had warned my parents that it was haunted. They'd seen the lights in the house go on and off, the front door would open, they'd hear noises. My mother, a very no-nonsense, hard-working woman, didn't believe in any of it and pushed forward with buying the house. Since I was a toddler, I could see spirit. My earliest memory, I was in my crib, and an older man came out of my closet. He looked like a shiny orb. He told me it was his room, and then floated out of the room. I'd often see him come and go, and as I got older, he became a background fixture in my house. He'd complain that he didn't like all the changes my parents were doing with the house and remodeling. Late at night, when everyone was sleeping, he'd slam the kitchen cabinet doors, except most of my family learned to sleep through it. We also lived in the city, so hearing sirens and ambulances throughout the night was pretty much normal. During the day, he'd call out people's names and open doors. He wanted us out. Unfortunately, he met his match with my family. My parents just got a dog, and anytime there was a noise, they'd say, "Oh, must be the dog." However, when we had people over, they had a very different reaction. One time when I was 4 years old, my grandmother was babysitting me at my house. I sat on the floor in front of the television watching morning cartoons. My grandmother sat on the couch behind me, when all of a sudden, the foyer door opened slowly. It was a glass door to a little mudroom that led to the front door of the house. This door was to be kept closed at all times. It prevented chills that came in from the front door during the harsh winters of the East Coast. I watched as my grandmother got up and closed the door and fussed with the handle to make sure it was secure. She turned to me. "Did you mess with that door and open it?" "No, I was sitting right in front of you. It wasn't me. I've been watching TV." I went back to watching my cartoons. A few minutes later, I heard the handle of the foyer door click. As I turned around, the door slowly creaked open several inches. My grandmother watched it too. She stood up abruptly and said in a stern voice, "Close that door and leave it alone. Do you understand me? Stop opening that door." "Grandma, it wasn't me. I'm right in front of you. You'd have seen me get up and open that door if it was me." I got up and closed the door. At first I thought the door wasn't quite shut all the way, but I knew I had seen my grandmother close the door and turn the handle to make sure it was secure. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the spirit of the man who lived in our house. I groaned. As soon as I sat down, the door swung back open. Before my grandmother could say a word, she was already on the edge of the sofa, ready to say something. I jumped up and ran to the door and closed it. This time I made sure it was closed and tightly secure. In a quiet voice, I said, "Stop opening the door. You're getting me in trouble." My grandmother frowned as she watched me. "Who are you talking to?" I hesitated a moment, but honesty was the only way to go with a stern old Irish woman. "Grandma, we have a spirit. An older man that lives in our house. He's the one who's been opening the door." I blurted out matter-of-factly and sat back down in front of the TV as if what I said was normal. "Nonsense! Stop making things up. Next time the door opens, you'll get a spanking and get sent to your room. Understand?" She now stood over me with her hand raised to strike should I disagree. "Grandma, it wasn't me. I'll prove it. Take the skeleton key and lock the door." She didn't move, and the look on her face said she didn't quite believe me either. "Lock the door, Grandma. I'll prove it to you, that it's a spirit opening the door." She frowned as she watched me. I stood in front of the TV, sternly prepared to defend myself. It wasn't the first time I'd been accused of something that I didn't do. My mom would often yell at me from the bedroom to get back in bed for turning the TV on in the middle of the night, except it wasn't me. It was the spirit. Suspicious. "How are you going to prove it?" my grandmother asked. "Grandma, just lock the door. I promise it's not me." With a weary sigh, she went to the door, took the skeleton key that dangled in the lock. She closed the door and locked it. The door clicked. She removed the key and turned the handle in an attempt to open the door, but it was locked. "Now go ahead and sit down, Grandma." I watched as she took the key with her and sat down, her eyes moving from the door and back. "Now open the door," I said out loud. "Show my grandmother it was you and not me, or I'm going to get punished for what you did." It wouldn't be the first time, or the last. I followed my grandmother's gaze to the foyer door. The handle clicked and turned and slowly opened about a foot. My grandmother's jaw dropped. She got up and raised a hand. "How did you do that?" she demanded. "I told you, it's the dead guy." She opened and closed the door to inspect it. "It's the dead guy, Grandma. He died almost 80 years ago from a heart attack. If you say hi to him, maybe he'll stop opening the door to get your attention." Who seemed to appear next to me now, concerned. As soon as I said that, the closet door, that was about a yard away, opened. I whipped my head around to see if my grandmother was going to yell at me for that too, but now she seemed mad that something invisible was messing with her, and she couldn't see it or control it. Her face was turning red. She stood over me, her hand raised. "Tell him to knock it off right now! Enough already!" She no longer cared who was opening the doors, but someone was going to get punished for it. My plan had backfired. I quickly turned to the man who was beside me. "Knock it off! Stop opening the door!" I yelled at him. I even used a tactic that worked before. "Or else I won't talk to you anymore." With my grandmother satisfied, she sat back on the couch. I sat back down and hoped he would listen to me. I knew I was the only one in my house that could see him or communicate with him. And beside his disgruntled showcase he often put on for everyone, I knew he must be lonely, and he appreciated that I talked to him. I had warned him before after he scared the first babysitter. She had run out of the house and refused to come back in. I watched her from the front door run down the street. She yelled from the safety of the sidewalk to call my mom to come home. I had reassured her it was just a dead guy. He can't really do anything to you. Unconvinced, she stayed there until my mom came home. Looking back, I don't think the spirit at my house liked the sitter and felt a little protective of me. In fact, we went through a lot of babysitters, which is why my grandmother had to watch me at the moment. It's funny, every time my grandmother came over to babysit, she didn't run away or scream like the others. Instead, she refused to acknowledge him and had enough Irish courage to use me to negotiate and threaten him to obey her. Needless to say, the spirit and I, both afraid of my grandmother, complied.